everyone. We have an ambitious agenda today, so I guess we should just go ahead and get started. But my name is Winnie Gao. I lead the workers' rights team at the Asian Law Caucus. And on behalf of ALC, Rideshare Drivers United, and Policy Link, I want to welcome you to our briefing today about the reality of working conditions for app-based drivers since Prop 22 was enacted at the end of November 2020. Senate Labor Committee Chair David Cotese is here, and we'll get to hear from him in just a minute. We also see our longtime workers' rights leader and advocate, Senator Lola Smallwood-Cuevas here. Thank you both so much for coming today and for your support. Just a little context for our discussion today. As folks know, Prop 22 devastatingly carves out covered drivers from basic labor, employment, and safety net protections like minimum wage, workers' comp, reimbursement for work expenses, unemployment insurance benefits, among other rights. Prop 22 was passed with the help of a record-breaking $220 million public campaign that was paid for by the app-based companies that benefit from Prop 22. And it was passed based on grand promises of guaranteed base pay, healthcare benefits, and increased flexibility and agency for drivers. But almost 3 years later, the reality of working conditions for app-based drivers has shown that Prop 22 falls far short of its promises. Today, we have an exciting panel of speakers to talk about that post-Prop 22 reality and the findings of 3 studies that were conducted by our organizations about post-Prop 22 pay, benefits, and working conditions. Our speakers today include drivers Eduardo Romero, Daniel Russel, Esterphanie St. Juste, and Nicole Moore from RDU. We also have Abbie Langston here from Policy Link and Ammad Rafiqi from the Asian Law Caucus. We'll have a Q&A and discussion session at the end, so please don't leave. But first, we're so pleased to have the chair of the Labor Senate Committee, Senator David Cotese, join us today. He has been an important ally for the hundreds of thousands of app-based drivers that work across the state. I'd like to invite Senator Cotese to come up and to make a few remarks.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I apologize that I have all those schedules, and I know Senator Smallwood-Cuevas can relate, and every busy person in the room can relate, at some level that requires me to be in another meeting in about 15 minutes, kind of typical around here. That said, I hope if you're recording this and keeping it a digital copy, that you would share that with my office, with me personally later, because I would really want to hear what this great panel, the individuals on this panel are saying, for my own edification from going forward. There's never more than a few moments around here where you don't learn if you listen, but you can't learn if you don't listen. And I need to honor you and have you know that it's important to me to hear what the real experts here have to say. Senator Smallwood-Cuevas also sits on the Senate Labor, Employment, and Retirement Committee, but sit is really the wrong verb because she is a force to be reckoned with. She's been organizing up here, even within our own caucus, and I'm very proud to be part of a labor equity group that's never existed before this year, believe it or not. The Senate has never had a labor equity caucus, has never even had a subgroup of the caucus that is primarily focused in that area, and we are 2 proud members of that, and she's just doing a terrific job of leading in every way, shape, and form. And one of the great victories that we had was Senate Bill 150, which has less to do with anything subject matter today, but more to do with maybe a sense of hope that all of you understand that as we have banded together, we've been able to bring the executive branch here, the governor on board, the Senate and the Assembly, just by being, for lack of a better word, forceful about the idea that labor standards and equity has to be attached to every single investment, otherwise there is no California for all. And policy actions as well, of course. Look, I grew up, 17 years old. I was doing less than minimum wage work, cleaning up trash and putting it in dumpsters in the back of a little neighborhood shopping center. And I was recruited at 17 years old to be an apprentice in UFCW, United Food and Commercial Workers, and stayed with that long enough that I became a journeyman, worked my way through college with part of that, effort and money. And frankly, it took me a hell of a long time ever afterwards, after a couple of degrees, to make that much money again. And it's something you will never forget, but also the importance of being organized and having a job steward, that can get between you and some of the oppressive tactics that have always existed, and it just seems like exist even more today in terms of retaliation and just trying to quash voices and worker rights, whether it's rideshare or whether it's, Starbucks employees. I mean, we're seeing it, but what we're also seeing, with what the media wants to call hot labor summer is, I think, a resurgence. I think we're seeing, I think it's hot labor multiple summers, right? So we're that background that I have introduced me directly to two strikes that we were involved with as UFCW, just in a 4-year period, right? Contract comes up right when I get there, I gotta go out, and contract comes up 3 years later, and we're out again. And what I understood generationally at that point what we were doing, because the older folks that had kids that didn't have health care back in those days, no health care access, et cetera, said to me, you're gonna be out there on the line. And when you're 18 years old, 19 years old, 20, why? What do I care? You care because this is what it means to us. I don't wanna pay, my wife's pregnant, I have to pay for, we're pregnant, we have to pay for the next delivery out of pocket, okay? And I don't want to assign any resentment to you, Dave, because you didn't come out and fight for our rights. So this is what we're trying to do here. When the Dynamex decision came along, it became very obvious to anybody with a law degree like me and anybody with a labor background, a public policy background, that we were going to need to codify that. And thank you very much, Lorena Gonzalez, for stepping up and saying, we can't just leave this to a multitude of lawsuits, trying to decipher every single thing that's gonna come along in terms of the difference between an independent contractor and an employee. And of course, as we all know, there were some old pre-Dynamex standards that, by and large, where people seemed to be abiding by in a lot of employment situations. But AB 5 changes all that, codifies it, and now, has led to Prop 22, the challenges, but also some good things. And when you talk about the labor movement and the resurgence of it right now, just as an aside, minor league baseball, it's never been unionized. It was always an independent contractor, almost a gig economy in and of itself that's been around for about 100 years in California, got flushed out by AB 5 because they can't do that anymore. And so we now are seeing labor management legislation coming forward where we can play a role as in the labor committee, as chair of the labor committee, whether it be the airlines or something like baseball, where folks come to us and say, we don't want to be out of compliance on the management side. How do we get into compliance, and can you help us, and it gives us opportunity. As contentious as this issue has been, I don't give up hope that there's opportunity at the end of the day, if we keep fighting, to bring people together so that compliance is legislated, and and all sides are coming forward saying this is how we can tailor an approach that actually, represents equity and working standards for people that are what we can live with and what we aspire to. At the same time, puts these folks that are trying to make money on the corporate side into compliance, so they're not going to get tagged every 5 minutes with wage theft claims and so forth, and they should be right now. I mean, we know that the results of Prop 22 at this point are people are making less, working harder, and I'm sure you're all going to be talking about that today. I have a son who partially tries to survive in this economy as a driver down in Burbank because he's a substitute teacher as well, which is another form of gig economy, as some of us know, and also a performer at night, in theater, and it's virtually impossible for him to survive or provide for himself at so many different levels. So again, I want you to know that your Senate Labor Chair, didn't just parachute in from the corporate world or something here, that I have this experience, with organizing, although I've not done it as much as some of my colleagues, like Smallwood, Cuevas, and Durazo, but I also have this understanding, I think, firsthand of how this is impacting and touching families and how indecent it is, and how, at the end of the day, what we need to be about is dignity. And we could talk about numbers and legalities and appeals and Supreme Court decisions all day long, but if we're not about providing dignity for drivers and their families, then we shouldn't be here. We should be on the legislative side, and any hearing or discussion like today that doesn't have dignity as its root and as its basis is probably misguided. And I know it does with all of you, but we need to get this across to others. People are putting, as my colleague will tell you, expediency even in state policy, expediency even in state investments, or perceived expediency, the rush to get investments out, the rush to have a win ahead of working standards and equity, and we can't let you get caught up in that because you've been fighting longer and harder than most of the workforces that we're involved with. We are now trying to deal with emerging workforces around climate, lithium batteries, things that we don't even have prevailing wages for if we wanted to. We can't even find the prevailing wages. And you have my commitment, and I think the commitment of our entire committee and our little caucus. I know I can speak on behalf of them. You have our commitment that you are not going to get, this issue is not going to get left behind or put by the legislature, put in the postmortem as if it's done and there's nothing more we can do. I received a call just a few days ago during the break to lead and bring forward an amicus brief as we go forward on the judicial side as well. I've done that before, some of you know. I will do that again. Of course, the call from leadership was, are you willing to put your name out there? Are you willing to do that? And the short answer is yes. And I know my counterpart in the Assembly Labor Committee will do the same damn thing because we've worked together like this. So we're with you. We get it. You can't have slogans like, protect our progress if you're going to have outcomes like you're experiencing right now. That's a hollow slogan. That's the state Senate slogan right now. And I'd say it if we were in caucus with all my colleagues. I know Senator Smallwood Cuevas would say it. It's a hollow slogan when you have drivers like all of you going backwards while there's billions of dollars of investment and new public policy coming out of the state of California that doesn't include you. So thank you for having me here, and please look us up as we get in interim recess. Let us know, whatever we can do and whatever role we can play besides amicus briefs in terms of actually moving all of you forward and making progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator, for your personal reflections, and we look forward to working with you in the committee.
Likewise, thank you.
So to turn to the core of our program, one of the grandest promises of Prop 22 was the promise of subsidies for drivers to help cover their health care costs. Based on a survey report conducted by RDU and PolicyLink, however, the reality shows that only a small fraction of drivers actually receive those subsidies, and most continue to rely on public assistance and or have no health care coverage at all. I'd like to turn it over to Eduardo and Abbie to tell us more about that driver experience and the report's findings. Eduardo.
Hello, my name is Eduardo Romero. I am a grandfather, husband, and Uber driver for 6 years. The health insurance has always been difficult to afford. But as a rideshare driver, I didn't have the extra money to cover it for a long time. Any profit that was made was spent in maintenance and other expenses. So like many immigrant families, we just went without coverage, especially during hard time. A few years ago, my wife started to show the signs of the early diabetes. Her blood sugar will spike. We worry. Her hand is going numb, and she often got tired very quickly. We went to the C doctor in our local clinic, and it was clear when we needed insurance. At the time, we didn't have coverage. So we ended to applying for medical. But even though as a full-time driver, I was living paycheck to paycheck. The government only looking for the gross income that I made. They denied for both the medical. I saw the plan B. The plan B is to apply to take advantage of the subsidy of the health care of the app. Uber asking us for the cover California. And then after 3 months, I will receive the Stipend. This was so expensive to do, since I earn a little doing to as a rideshare. Now I live in constant fear that I will lose the Stipend. I am unable to meet the requirement. I am one of the 10% of the looking driver who receive the Stipend. But only because I am forced to work times to meet the minimum hours to drive. Many other drivers don't qualify. Even they have the app on for 40 to 50 hours. The same like me. Many more don't even know about this benefit. Not only does disqualify us from being independent enough to work our own hours, it pushes the cost of the insurance to the taxpayer through the Cover California, and the rider through the Proposition 22 tax is unacceptable. So many other drivers get left through the cracks. And thank you for the senator and the another senator to stay here to help a lot of drivers to get our rights under California Constitution.
Thank you. I'm Abbie Langston from PolicyLink, and I don't have a lot to add to what Eduardo said. I just want to say a couple of things about his story. He described himself as one of the lucky ones. One of the lucky ones. As difficult as it is to receive and to keep this stipend, it's actually the lucky 1 in 10 to 10% of drivers under Prop 22 have received some form of healthcare stipend from Uber or Lyft. And as he mentioned, those who have it are sort of under constant threat of losing it, because if you don't meet the minimum of 30 hours a week of engaged time, you are no longer eligible. Drivers can spend 40 or 50 hours a week in their cars and not make that threshold. So it's not as simple as work 30 hours a week and you're covered. If you go to work in an office and you show up for a meeting and you have to wait 10 minutes until your boss gets there, there's no negative impact on your pay, on your eligibility for benefits from your employer. If you clock in at a construction site and you have a little dead time before you're actively engaged in work, right? Because the materials truck has to be unloaded. That doesn't put your healthcare benefits at risk. That is not true for drivers under Prop 22. That's what lucky looks like, right? The difficulty in accessing this benefit, the constant difficulty in keeping it, that you don't have any control over, because it's not as simple as clock in, put your time in, and then you're covered. There are algorithms, which are controlled by the companies, that determine how much of the time you're spending in your car with the app on ready to go actually count as engaged work. So when we keep in mind the 10% who have access, that's what that actually looks like. It's not as if they're covered and settled and can take a breath, a sigh of relief, because they know that they and their families are going to be safe and have access to affordable health care. So what about the other 90%, the other 9 in 10 drivers? About a third of them are paid so little by these companies that they receive public assistance, which under Prop 22, in piling injury onto injury, makes them ineligible to receive the healthcare stipends from their employers, from Uber and Lyft. 16% have no insurance at all, which is double the national rate. And that rate applies for both employed and unemployed persons. So if you are a rideshare driver, you are twice as likely as anybody else in the country to be without health insurance. Again, you can be spending more than a full-time week in your car ready to go and still not be eligible for these benefits. And as was mentioned earlier, there are plenty of drivers who don't even know these benefits exist, right? There were big promises made about companies reaching out, being proactive, all of the benefits that were going to come to drivers from Prop 22. And there are folks out there who might be meeting the threshold, who might be eligible, who don't even know that it's an option for them. Information might not be available in their language, or they might not be able to sort of navigate and find it for themselves when it's not made directly available by the companies. So there are, the majority of drivers really are being left behind, falling through the cracks here. There are a few, like Eduardo, who are lucky enough to access these benefits, and we need to demand better. We need to do better.
Thank you, Abbie and Eduardo. Now that we've heard a bit about the healthcare subsidies, the sobering reality of those healthcare subsidies, I want to turn it over to the promise about guaranteed base pay for drivers. As we will hear, it turns out drivers are making far less than the minimum wage for all the hours that they're actually working. Daniel's going to walk us through his post-Prop 22 experience and the findings of PolicyLink and RDU's study about post-Prop 22 pay.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Russel, and I want to thank you all for having us today and allowing us to tell the driver's side of the story. Before telling you about the pay study conducted by RDU and PolicyLink on the effects of Prop 22, I want to tell you a little bit about my story and how I came to driving. I'm a special education teacher by trade, but I left the classroom on sabbatical to drive Lyft and Uber, essentially to maximize my time with my daughter while she was young. I was daddy daycare during the day and went out to drive at nights and on weekends. At first it was okay. The schedule was ideal. You can't put a price on time with your child. My car was also brand new. Over time though, our rates decreased, and I found myself working more and more to earn less and less. I was working 60 to 70 hours a week, sometimes sleeping out of my car because it didn't make sense to waste gas and money going home when I had to be back on the road in a few hours to make a bonus. You see, the companies use sliding bonuses and algorithms to manipulate drivers and maximize our effort for minimum pay. Let me tell you a story. I'm driving in Monterey late one night chasing a bonus. It's Thursday at 4 a.m. The fishing boats are headed out to sea for their daily catch, and I'm trying to squeeze in a few more rides before I call it a night because I have to. I'm tired. I've been to Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, and around the Bay and back again, but my job still isn't done. If I don't get these 2 rides, I'll come up short, and I'll be starting my next shift on plastic, charging my gas on my credit card. I need to be in bed. My daughter's gonna wake me up in a few hours. I'm on David Avenue in Monterey, headed down the hill towards Lighthouse, Cannery Row, and the aquarium. I'm thinking about Steinbeck and Doc Ricketts and his marine laboratory. I'm thinking of all the places I've been in the last 48 hours driving. I'm crunching numbers in my head. How much money do I need to make this weekend? Will I have enough funds to take my daughter to the fair? Will I have enough time? Among those fleeting thoughts, I'm drifting off to sleep, thinking of pillows and soft warm sheets and county sheep, and then boom. I come to, and I'm barreling down head on, about to crash into a large van that's honking at me. I've knocked out behind a live wheel, and I've drifted off into the other lane. I woke up just in time. I jerked the wheel and pulled the car to the right. I'm a lucky one. By some measure of divine intervention, I got home to my daughter that night. Again, I'm a lucky one. There are many drivers who don't get home. There have been studies describing this as the most dangerous job in America. Drivers injured, murdered, and killed by assaultive passengers. Again, I was lucky. The crazy thing is I went back to work later that day. I had to. I drove and drove and drove. 275,000 miles over 3.5 years. First in the Bay, and then in LA, where the rates were even worse. I maintained a top-notch customer service rating over 20,000 rides. 20,000 rides. I feel if you slave away for a company for years and do a good job, your pay should go up. But it was quite the opposite. That's the life of a driver. I know all too well about how this job is a scam. It's why I joined RDU and volunteered to participate in the study by PolicyLink to provide real data about how drivers are faring no better under Prop 22, the law written by Lyft and Uber to protect their ability to take advantage of drivers. Now let's look at the study and see what it tells us about how much drivers are currently making. If we're to take a look at each dollar, you see a dollar on the screen up there, that a driver earns, and then look at how much they spend to operate and care for their business, we will see that drivers are in fact doing no better under Prop 22 than they were before, and are in fact making far less than they would if Prop 22 did not exist. Our study shows that out of every dollar a driver makes, they spend 50 cents on maintenance and operation of their vehicle. Of course, there's the cost of gas. Gas was at $2.60 a gallon when I started driving. Not once have the companies increased compensation for drivers, even though the price of gas has doubled. Then there are the oil changes, about every 2 or 3 weeks. I went through 2 to 3 sets of brakes and 2 sets of tires every year. I had to. People's lives are in your hands when you're behind the wheel. The companies don't care though. They built their brand on sidestepping and safety regulations of the transportation industry and only check our cars once a year. Then there is insurance. Your rates are higher when you operate a car for your business. They should be. Again, people's lives are in our hands. Besides, when you spend that much time on the road, you're bound to get in an accident or two. It's the law of averages. Then there's the depreciation on your vehicle. You're lucky if your car keeps running. I sure was. My mechanic laughs about the 300,000 plus miles on my Kia Optima. Kias aren't supposed to run that long. Many drivers lose their cars due to engine failure and end up in unfair rental contracts with rideshare companies chasing bonuses and minimum ride stipulations just so they can stay in their car and on the road. Drivers are vulnerable. That's why the next 15 cents out of every dollar a driver makes has to go to safety nets, necessary due to our independent contractor status. As was already mentioned, as independent contractors, we're not eligible for workman's compensation or disability should something happen. I knew a driver who developed a sciatic nerve from all the hours hunched over the wheel and could no longer work due to the chronic pain. He was homeless due to his inability to work. During the pandemic, the public and the taxpayer had to foot the bill when drivers were unable to work because Uber and Lyft had paid nothing on our behalf into state unemployment treasuries due to our independent contractor status. That's what this is all about. Classify drivers as independent contractors and avert the cost of labor. Of that 15 cents, 10 cents goes to health care and self-employment taxes. If the driver has enough left, I knew many drivers who couldn't file for taxes or have health care because they had no money left and were suffering in debt. Basically, at the end of the day, a driver is taking home 15 cents out of every dollar they make in order to pay their phone bills, another cost of doing business, their rent, their water bill, their electricity bill, and to put food on the table for their families. It's nowhere near enough. Another thing the study showed is how under Prop 22, drivers are not paid for all our time spent working. Drivers are only paid for engaged time when we have a passenger in our car. The study shows that drivers spend on average 27% of our time unpaid waiting for our next ride or returning home from a long trip. I remember on my worst nights, I would bring home $60 after working 11 hours having spent 30 on gas. Sometimes it's slow, and other times there are too many drivers out and not enough passengers. We'll get to that in a second. Essentially, this means that 1 out of every $4 a driver makes is burned up in unpaid mileage and time spent working but not getting paid. Of course, there's a human cost to all those hours on the road. I remember my daughter being very happy, ecstatic when the pandemic hit because Daddy wasn't so tired all of the time from all those long hours of driving. Again, I was a lucky one. At the end of the day, the study shows us that under Prop 22, nothing has changed. Drivers are still losing out. The study shows that drivers are making $6.20 an hour under Prop 22. If Prop 22 didn't exist and drivers were paid like essential employees under California law, they would be making $17.20 an hour, $11 more an hour, and have access to safety nets like health insurance, workman's compensation, and unemployment. You see, drivers are faring no better under Prop 22. It was a lie. In fact, the unfair law authored by the rideshare corporations locks drivers into poverty wages and continues to allow the companies to avert standard labor and safety regulations and act as they please. They can have as many drivers on the road as they want because there is no cost to them for labor. They win with decreased wait time for passengers, and we, the drivers, will continue to lose. It's all a scam. I know because I was a victim of that scam. I drove myself into 5 figures of debt driving rideshare. But again, I was a lucky one. I had family there to pick me up a few times when I was down on a tough month where I experienced unexpected car repairs. While organizing drivers, I've heard many horror stories, countless tales of horrible accidents and totaled cars, families on their 3rd and 4th rideshare vehicle where mom and dad alternate shifts of childcare and driving. As a teacher, I've had students unable to finish their homework because they were caring for little siblings while their parents were out dashing or driving. Maybe they were out with their parents working, riding in the passenger seat. I remember taking my daughter on Uber Eats runs to complete more than a few bonuses. I see tired eyes behind Uber and Lyft placards in the drop-off lines at school in the morning. I remember when I used to drop off my own daughter at her school when she was in kindergarten, and then rush off straight to work, sliding my app into the on position before I was even out of the school parking lot, as I was trying to capitalize on the end of a morning rush hour and busy time because there was no guarantee of rides later in the day. And that was usually on the back of an all-nighter. It's the insecurity of the independent contractor and the life of a driver. This is why we ask that you take action against the farce of a law written by the companies and sold to drivers and the public with millions of dollars in lies and dishonest advertising. Drivers are faring no better under their law, and Prop 22 was clearly written to protect the ability of these billion-dollar corporations to act without impunity and exploit their workforce. If we do not stop them, they will continue to violate the rights of workers everywhere and take advantage of taxpayers everywhere, while they continue to make billions and billions of dollars. Let's pull these irresponsible and exploitive corporations to the curb and finally make them pay their share. And let's restore dignity to drivers, like our esteemed Senator Labor Chair alluded to. Thank you again, and thank you for having us and hearing our story.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that impassioned account. Next, we'd like to talk about another important aspect of drivers' daily post-Prop 22 lives. On top of the healthcare and pay, post-Prop 22, the work also continues to be incredibly precarious. So I want to turn it over to Esterphanie and Ammad to talk about the dangers of being fired by an app and the ways in which customer discrimination and bias impact drivers' pay and their ability to work.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to Daniel because you really captured the spirit of the driver's plight. Thank you. My name is Esterphanie, and I'm a founding member of Rideshare Drivers United. I've been a full-time Uber and, augmented by Lyft. I'm primarily an Uber driver. I started driving in June of 2015. And I temporarily quit because of the pandemic, COVID, and I'm diabetic. So I stopped working for well over a year. So Uber deactivated me because I wasn't an active driver at the time. And I decided to, around September 21, I was ready to go back driving again. And I I contacted Uber, and they kept on telling me that I needed this document or that document, and it just wasn't happening. So deactivation. Deactivation without legitimate cause is the main drivers, it's one of the top 3 driver complaints about Lyft and Uber. Deactivation is what the rideshare industry calls either temporary or permanent suspension. Permanent suspension is you're fired, and temporary suspension is, as a driver, you lose the ability to access the platform. So then you can't make money, you can't drive. So basically, the decision is based on whatever criteria they have, Uber and Lyft. The app, the algorithm, is your employer judge and jury. Can you imagine trying to defend yourself when you don't have the name of the person or even exactly what they said, but yet they can affect your livelihood? So one of the most common complaints is, one of the common complaints that riders can put on a driver is like, oh, I think my driver was drinking or my driver was high. That shuts you down immediately. Like in October of 2017, I had a rider who didn't like the route I took because of the traffic. You can imagine bad traffic in LA, it's legendary. So he was sure that it was the route I took. So when I dropped him off, he called Uber support and complained and said, I think she was drunk. And Uber shut me down immediately. So then I'm like, there's nothing I can do. So afterwards, if I picked up the customer at LAX, I went back to the LAX police station and told them, will you do a sobriety test on me? And they said that Uber nor the customer had contacted them. There is no report. And I was like, well, can't you? They said, no. And we don't think that, and you don't seem drunk to us or anything. So there it was. I lost that weekend. Why an app in San Francisco was investigating me in LA. So, and in fact, about a year later, and by the way, at that time, I had been 24 years sober. So a year later, another customer who was late for a pickup, they got in the car, they're bickering between each other, they started bickering with me, and then they were speaking to me in a disrespectful tone, and it's like, you know what? I'm picking you up in Santa Monica, and I'm driving you all the way to Long Beach? I don't think so. Just quit the ride, there's no need to go further. So I asked them to get out of the car. And the lady gave me stink eye. And she looked and she's like, you know what? I think you're drunk. I'm gonna tell Uber. So of course, I was cut off. And I didn't have access to the platform. So basically, At the end of September 21, when COVID was on the decline, I contacted Uber so that I could get back to driving. And they kept on telling me that, first of all, I needed my background check. I got it. I sent it to them. They said, oh, your DMV report. I got it. I sent it to them. Oh, the DMV can't, their machine isn't working for some reason because they need a EPN notice, which is an employee pull notice. I don't know. But they haven't, and then they told me not to contact the DMV anymore. Uber told me not to contact DMV. So, anyway, I'm still waiting for Uber to contact me this year. Anyway, I'll wrap it up, and thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Esterphanie. I've got the unenviable task of following such testimony. But for those of us who like to look deeper into the numbers to see whether her experience is isolated, let's talk about it. For drivers, deactivation remains the second most important issue after pay and benefits. And surprisingly, in the state of California, no one had looked at deactivation seriously. So we decided, as Asian Law Caucus, to work with RDU to do so. Our survey covered over 800 drivers across the state of California, Spanish, Arabic, and Chinese-speaking drivers over the summer of 2022. What we found was that over 2/3 of drivers have experienced deactivation, which, as Esterphanie explained, is either temporary, God knows how long, or permanent deactivation. Drivers of color and immigrant drivers were disproportionately impacted. As you can see from the chart, I'll try to go through some of those important statistics. The rate was significantly higher for drivers with language barriers. 86% of drivers who don't speak English and 78% of those with limited English proficiency reported experiencing some form of deactivation as compared to 61% of drivers who spoke English. So it's a bad experience regardless, but if you don't speak English as fluently as others, it's a worse experience. Now, what are the results of deactivation? Esterphanie talked about being deactivated suddenly. Surveyed drivers, by the way, 81% of the drivers that we talked to said that driving on these apps was the primary source of income for them. They struggled to make ends meet after deactivation. 86% of drivers suffered some type of hardship after deactivation. 18% lost their car, which, as Daniel said, is basically what you make your income with, and 12% lost their homes after deactivation. One would imagine with these severe consequences that the companies would do something to allow these drivers to get back on. But 30% of drivers who were deactivated said that they weren't given any explanation or reason. Again, some of them are lucky to have known, for example, what the allegations were. Now let's look at what some of the top reasons for deactivation given to the drivers who did receive an explanation were. Number one was customer complaints, like the one that Esterphanie talked about, or low customer ratings. 42% of deactivated drivers were told that their deactivation was due to customer complaints. And 10% said that it was because of low customer ratings. Now keep in mind, like Daniel and Esterphanie, riders may have a perfect history of giving thousands of rides for multiple years over near perfect ratings, but a single complaint can get you deactivated either temporarily or permanently. Now, one might ask, why is this an issue? It's an issue because the problem with relying solely or mainly on customer complaints is that you ignore the real history of customer discrimination. Drivers are negatively impacted by customer biases, which can manifest in poor customer ratings, complaints against them, and that are really directed at the person, the driver's gender, national origin, sexual orientation, other protected characteristics. We surveyed drivers about this. 2/3 of all drivers reported facing some form of customer bias or discrimination at some point at their time driving for Uber and Lyft. Of those, 52%, half of them said it was because of their race or national origin. This also included reporting rates of sexual and violent harassment from customers, and this was against drivers of all genders. Of course, women were more impacted, but all genders had sort of reported this. Again, given the seriousness of the deactivation and the discrimination the drivers face, one would imagine that the companies would take this discrimination seriously. In fact, these companies used unchecked customer ratings and complaints to continue to deactivate drivers. Drivers have overwhelmingly reported, due to language barriers or inability to know why they were deactivated, that it was impossible for them to challenge these deactivations. 40% of deactivated Uber drivers and 16% of deactivated Lyft drivers reported they weren't provided enough information on how to appeal their deactivation. And this is a process that we're seeing working out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esterphanie and Ammad. I do just want to note, for those who didn't notice, we do have a one-pager over by the door that includes the links to these reports where you can read them yourselves and find out a lot more information about them. But we know this was a lot, but these issues are not without solutions. And so I do want to turn it over now to Nicole to tell us about some of the ideas about what lawmakers and regulators can do now. And then we'll open up to Q&A.
Hi, my name is Nicole Moore. I'm a part-time driver with a good day job, and that's not enough to raise a kid and live in LA. So I started driving back in 2017. I'm also the president of Rideshare Drivers United. So the frame here is that I'm not the majority demographic of rideshares in California. We're a majority Black, brown, immigrant workforce. And by addressing the issues we heard about today, we are directly addressing inequity and racism of our economic system in California. And it's beyond time to do that. So I want to start with where we are with Prop 22. A lot of people have told me our hands are simply tied. Your hands are not tied as lawmakers. Prop 22 does limit some things for drivers that are actually covered by it. We actually think they don't even follow their own law around flexibility and independence. So at times it may not apply to us, but there are key issues that lawmakers can address right now. One is transportation and safety regulation. Thousands of people get into Ubers and Lyfts every day, and there's very little California regulation in this one area of transportation. Every other area of transportation in the state is regulated for worker safety and for passenger safety. It's critical. In one of our, we're trying to get Lyft and Uber to follow basic Cal OSHA laws, right? And they're saying, oh, well, this doesn't apply to us. That just can't be true. So there's definitely transportation and safety regulation that can be head-on dealt with. Deactivation. Everybody's talking about, let's regulate AI, right? We have to regulate AI, it's gonna hurt people. It's hurting people right now. What's happening, what Esterphanie described is AI. The low and lower rates of pay we get are AI deciding what is our lowest price point. The same way you as passengers, it's judging what is your highest price point. And so, creating this gap, which is profit for the companies, that's AI hurting workers and hurting customers. We can regulate AI and help the people in this room. There is really good policy and regulation coming out of a few different cities and states that California could look at. Chicago is working right now on a good deactivation regulation. Minnesota almost got one passed and then it got vetoed by the governor, but they're looking at moving that same type of deactivation protection in Minnesota, or in Minneapolis. There's a new good rule in Seattle. Seattle is the city as opposed to the state. Seattle has passed some really good regulation around deactivation. We can do that here. Data. How do you even know how much drivers are making, how much passengers are being overcharged, how many cars are in the city or the state, unless we get the data? And I would say that in where we are at, in terms of technology, we not only need the raw data, we need to understand the algorithms that the companies use to control the workforce with that data. Those are some areas that lawmakers can go. I think also we need to look at it as a state, because otherwise it's whack-a-mole, right? But we also need to look at it in terms of municipalities being able to control transportation. Let's give some power to municipalities to regulate this industry. It's been really tied to the CPUC in the past. There hasn't been a lot of regulation under that. But let me just point out that when lawmakers passed EV rules to impact rideshare, CPUC is all over it, and they're doing a good job. They're listening to drivers. They're, trying, but it started because there was good legislation. There was basically a mandate from you guys to make it happen. So we need legislation and lawmaker support to make regulation happen. So those are just a few ideas that I think are really important to what we can do now. But I want everybody also to look a little bit into the future when Prop 22 overturns, right? We believe it will overturn in the California Supreme Court. What does that mean? Well, we cannot have a gap between Prop 22 overturning and labor rights enforcement. If we have a gap, we'll bring upon us the same weakness that happened in 2020 when AB 5 was put in motion January 1st, and by September, October, November, we had Prop 22 because there was no enforcement. We filed wage claims in 22. More than 5,000 of us drivers filed wage claims using labor law. We were owed as a whole $1.3 billion. None of us have seen a penny of that. It's 3.5 years ago, right? So, and that's something the Attorney General's carrying, 3 cities, the Labor Commission is carrying that, forward. But that's how slow enforcement through the courts is, right? Drivers can't wait. So we can't have a gap. We need labor rights to stay in place. I mean, look at farm workers who have done such good work to try and, organize and compel. They're not covered by FSLA. They're still fighting their way to minimum wage, overtime, unemployment. And it's been 50 years. So we need to make sure that labor rights stay in place. But labor rights is not actually working for drivers in terms of pay and benefits. It's working for stuff like unemployment, which until Prop 22, we were eligible for unemployment. Now we're not. We get deactivated. We have no safety net. We're injured on the job. We have very little safety net if we can access it, because it's only through the companies. So we need to regulate pay and benefits when Prop 22 is lifted. New York City is a prime example. Drivers in New York City were making an average of $11 to $12 an hour after expenses, and they, through the Taxi and Limousine Commission, which is their transportation agency for New York, they've been able to move it to $20 an hour after expenses, right? So that's real take-home pay, and it has changed drivers' lives. We've seen the opposite in California. We need that kind of regulation. And what I would say is that we, you know, so like in New York, labor law is in place, but it's not what's helping drivers with pay, right? But they're not giving that away. It's like giving away your house so you can have a refrigerator. You can't give that away. If we're gonna raise labor rights in California, we don't cut a group out of it. So that's how we see it. We've seen similar approaches to what happened in New York, in Chicago, Minnesota, and even Seattle, the city, as opposed to the state. There's some problems with the state. But California can figure this out. We don't have to be hypnotized by false promises from the tech companies. We can have full labor rights, strong regulation, including municipal regulation, and it's possible, right? And what we really need is, you know, let's try to do some good work now. Let's make sure we're locked and loaded and ready to move when 22 is overturned, because frankly, we just heard the report about how much drivers made. You know, when we did a study of $6.20 an hour, right? That study was done at the end of 2021. That's where we got that data. We all know we've taken at least a 15% pay cut since then, right? So we're making less than that now. And the reason I know that to be true in a bigger picture is that back in 2021, there wasn't a driver I could find who was getting regular money called the Prop 22 bonus from, you know, they established that low rate, and if you make less than that, they'll make up the difference. Nobody was getting that. And that's when we estimated that people were making $6.20 an hour. So now lots of drivers are getting that check because our pay has sunk below that unbelievable low place. So I believe we can do it. We need to think about now. We need to think about post-22 overturn, and we can really make California work again, even for app-based workers.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you to all the speakers and drivers especially for sharing. And now we want to open it up to Q&A or any comments or discussion about what was discussed.
We do want to visit folks in their home offices too with drivers from your districts and stuff. So, I mean, we see this as the beginning of the conversation, and we really want to work with the body here to get good law and regulation passed to help us.
All right.
There you go.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Thanks for participating. Thanks for